Hello, colleagues, and welcome to the Frank and Stan chat. This is edition 106, and I'm delighted to say that we have another guest with us, and it's Neil Jurd. Hello, Neil.
Hi, Neil.
Hi, Frank.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you for joining us. This is the Jubilee weekend, extended weekend, the bank holiday. So thank you for giving up your time today. And hello, Stan. How are you?
Hi, fine.
Yeah. A lot going on in your life, but we'll keep that to ourselves.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Positive things.
Yeah, that's great. Neil, do you want to just tell everybody who you are and what you do and how we know each other?
Well, I wrote a book called The Leadership Book, and I think that's why I'm here primarily. But my background is I was an army officer. I instructed at Sandhurst. I led soldiers on operations all over the place. And then for the last 11 or 12 years, I've been working in leadership development. And that has led to the book ultimately. I mean, during lockdown, I wrote the book. And I've also got an app called Leader Connect, which we have set up in the last year. And a podcast as well, actually. Right. A rival, but not obviously in the same league as yours, the Leader Connect podcast.
I mean, we talked before, but I was saying to Neil that my guitar teacher had a Sandhurst experience and did sort of military training after that, leadership training. I'm interested, Neil, as to how that sort of training has influenced your thinking, you know, the themes that run through the book.
I think a lot, but the edges have probably been taken off it with as the edges have come off me, the edges have probably come off my. And I was a cadet at Sandhurst and then later an instructor at Sandhurst. And there's a real focus on probably two things. One is being clear what you're trying to achieve. And the other is people, connecting with people and looking after people. And I think those two themes have come into have stayed with me.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I wish just a shout out for Chris Hemmingway, who is my guitar teacher. I've tried for 2.5 years to get him on this show, but he won't. But I find the sort of revelations in terms of his insight into leadership, I think through his military experience I just find it fascinating. It's just as enjoyable as the guitar lesson, to be honest, you know, just listening to him reminiscing. But anyway, well, thank you for joining us. Okay, Stan, you're going to kick off with what's caught your eye this week?
Yeah, the increase in the percentage of head teachers who are thinking of leaving the job. It takes it up to, I think it was 40% of heads that they spoke to said it was a consideration at the moment. And that's really a disaster for education, because, you know, we may have new recruits coming through, but not those sort of numbers. And it takes me back to when it was difficult to find, particularly for small schools when I worked in Lancashire, and at times the wrong people ended up being promoted because they're the warm body that's available. And eventually that means that the school doesn't run as well and everything else starts to fall apart. And I just wonder, are we doing enough, genuinely enough, to support head teachers in what used to be regarded as a lonely role, and probably now is getting worse and worse. And, you know, mentioning from Neil's book, the thing about autonomy and being able to do things and being trusted, those things are all being slowly taken away, so that it doesn't feel like you're a trusted member of the community. People question you, people challenge you, and I don't think we throw enough support into that to sort of say, yes, these people are really trusted, they should be trusted, they're good members of society, they're doing a really difficult job, and we should back off from some of the criticism. But it comes from all sides.
Yeah, I mean, you're a trustee, aren't you, Neil, or have been?
Of a charity.
Yeah, and a coach as well. So I mean, in a
Yeah.
sense, this is sort of like territory where I think I'm starting to feel guilty here. Stan does this with me, where I'm a trustee, and I'm thinking, when was the last time I spoke to the CEO about, the great job he's doing? So
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Do you find yourself having to stepping forward to sort of keep morale high, making people feel as though that you value what they're doing in those various roles?
Well, yes, and also some of my work is actually working directly with schools. So I do work with some head teachers. So I have felt at close hand their pain or their isolation or their stress, and especially over the last couple of years, where uh, the changing pace and the relentless, unclear direction that was thrown at them. And I think it takes the edge off what I would think that a head teacher or any leader is there to do, because a leader is supposed to have time to think, and whatever they're leading should be reflecting the character of the leader, the personality of the leader, the energy of the leader, and that's really hard to do at the moment. They're having to, gosh, there's so much management in there that it takes
That's
the
exactly
art
what I
of
was
it.
going to say, Neil. And I've
Yeah.
said this. I've
Well
said this
done,
to
Neil.
some. I was working with a group of new head teachers about 6 to 9 months ago, and I said, "You've not had the opportunity to lead yet. You think you're leading, but actually you're managing at the moment, because everything you have to do is either dictated centrally, or there's no real choice to be made. These are the things you have to do for the school to get through this current crisis. So you're
Yeah.
not leading yet, you're managing. And
Yeah.
I worry for some of them that leadership's going to actually hit them like a brick wall when
Yeah.
the scaffolding that's been around the pandemic disappears, and suddenly they're left with, wow, the next decision's mine.
Yeah, I
And
think. Go on, Neil.
so, well, I was going to say, I don't, from what I've seen, and I'm obviously not from within education in my own background, but again, from what I've seen, that there isn't a great focus on leadership. There's teachers develop with a series of what seem to be largely management courses, and that they might be given some leadership theory, but there isn't. I mean, when I go back, I mean, you mentioned your guitar teacher, Frank, but he and I and anyone else in the military has gone through literally years of leadership development training. A year at Sandhurst, probably another 3 months on a young officers course. Depends what rank you were, but junior NCOs will have gone through their equivalents, which again is many months of training just to lead. You start off leading 4 people. So, but I've probably spent 2.5 or 3 years in formal education to lead. How does that compare to a head teacher who could be leading 1,600 people?
It's well, there's a centralized scheme with a qualification, the national qualification, but it is central, and it's got no context to it, to the school or to where you're teaching. And in fact, I might be wrong here, but it used to be, because we looked into offering it as an option for heads in Lancashire, but you weren't allowed even to change the slides. You had to deliver it as it was. And there were parts of it that, as we've said before, if you're talking about a 2-teacher school in the middle of rural Lancashire or the Lakes, as opposed to a large comprehensive in London, and the training is the same for both, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
No.
I found we had a lot of, when that was the big thing, I found we had a lot of new head teachers who sort of said, yeah, I know what leadership is, I have a vision, and I bring it into the school, and everybody follows me and my vision. And when then you come across Mrs. Goggins, who says we don't do it that way here, there was no preparation, no tools for dealing with that. It was this sort of perfect view of, you just create a vision and that's it.
I think
Plus, I have a sorry, Frank, but I do
Right.
have a thing about it's actually the governor's vision. It should be
well, yes,
the head's the executive leader, not
yeah,
not the strategic manager.
yeah. But I think for me, just going back to that point about retention, is that I was saying before the broadcast that went up to Kelso with a group of Blackpool leaders to look at the way they're doing digital education there, and it's quite interesting that a colleague who I'm going to talk about shortly. She took her deputy with her because she could see that this was a program that was going to take a long period of time to embed. And I also felt as though she was really taking quite seriously the sort of succession planning in her school. And actually that we've got a number of within the white paper that's been, well, heavily hacked away at in Parliament last week or this week. But actually there's a need for us, if there is a drive for more academies and for trusts to take these on, that's going to present challenges to existing leadership teams in terms as people step up to take on sort of more senior roles within the trust. So, school leaders need to be considering sort of succession planning from the minute they're appointed, really, and actually I was never in a position in all of my years as a head teacher to appoint a deputy. And I was fortunate to have, good deputies. But actually, somebody said to me, Frank, you just got to get over this. You've got your deputy. You've got to make the best of your deputy. You've got to make the best of your senior leadership team. You've got to make the best of all your teachers. That's part of it, So I think this idea of senior leaders, considering resigning, is a serious worry. And actually, I hope they're thinking, if they are thinking of doing that, where the next leader's coming from, because it might be the person in the office next door to them, but that person, if they're not thinking about getting them ready for that role, it will fall over in the way you've expressed, Stan.
I do think, Frank, that's an important thing that you've just mentioned there, that heads don't get in preparation for leadership, and because the sort of rhetoric has been, you go into a school that's not working, you get rid of the staff that aren't good enough, and you recruit really good people, and then you move the school forward, when the reality is that's not an option. So getting the best out of the people you've got is a real skill, and I think that's something that I don't know, in the last few years it doesn't seem to be something that we're actually trying to do.
No.
How do you get somebody who's tired, who's this illusion with the way things are? How do you build up their morale again? How do you get them back to where they were 5-10 years ago, to the enthusiasm, etc.? And we don't teach those skills, do we?
No, but it goes back to Neil, though, doesn't it? About leaders are clear about where they're going.
Yeah.
And they're good on the people skills are good. You do it. You trust people because actually, George or Mary, they're a really great person, and I've had enough time to understand what they're about, and I want to give them personally, the support I can. It's not about a job, is it? It's about wanting to give them, in a way. I mean, I always worry about this, but it's got to be an element of friendship in there. It's probably not. You don't want it to be friends.
No.
You want a bit of friendship, a bit of love, a bit of care, a bit of concern. All of that, even though it may be the big boss. Anyway.
Yeah, I like the phrase when somebody used to say to me, you need to be a critical friend, and then stopped and said, but you need to be a friend before you can be critical.
Yeah.
So and that to me sum that up, that you need to get a relationship with somebody before you can start trying to change their behaviors. You need to understand what's driving their current behaviors before you can start to influence how that might change.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to Neil's What's Caught Your Eye this week.
Well, it was Glyn Potts being awarded the MBE, and I know Glyn has been a guest on your podcast previously, and I have followed Glyn's work over many years, and just watching how he has applied. I mean, he's been really up against it, like everybody he's had. I mean, his school's huge. I think it's one of the largest in the country.
Yeah.
Obviously, he had COVID to cope with, but then on top of that, he's got this awful building, which is basically like working in a sinking ship, as far
It's
as
like a sieve. It's a brand new building.
Yeah.
Built by Carillion.
And it looks incredible from the outside, but I think it's a private finance deal of some sort.
Yeah.
And rarely a week goes by where they don't have boiling hot water gushing out of pipes in one of their classrooms, or roof leaking or whatever.
You're really selling that school well, but
yes, but
it's full though, isn't it? It's full.
Yeah, I mean, amazingly, what the work he's done on just building a team, developing the culture, he does it. The word love came up. He does his work with love. He's really passionate about changing the lives for the better of the young people that go to his school.
Yeah.
And you can feel it. I mean, I've been in there many times, and you can absolutely just feel this passion for doing more. And he brings out the best in other people, and that's the pupils and the staff. And then, of course, he does a lot of stuff around the edges of that as well. He's also involved with the Army Cadet Force. I know his school has set up a Cadet Force detachment. I know they do the D.A.V. awards.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's. I mean, I know awards can always be a bit contentious, but I have to say this is one that I looked at it when I first saw the message. I looked at it and I just smiled. I just smiled with joy to see that. It's so well.
Stan and I were both relieved that his appearance on this chat show didn't put an end to his chances of an honour. But yeah. I agree, and I also think one of the things that Glyn's also very good at is he is truth to power.
Yes.
So and I remember meeting Glyn for the first time in Bradford about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, and this was for the Times Education Commission, and he was absolutely letting everybody know what was wrong. I mean, he was not, and I think also that comes over in his communication. Like, he has a problem with parking and parents parking outside his school, but he's there with his little camera, his phone, and he's talking directly to the camera, to his parents, to the community, and showing the cars. These are the cars that are parked. This is causing a risk to our children. You must stop it. It's just that I just love that sort of like putting the community and his children absolutely at the forefront of it.
Yes.
I would also like to say, because I know a couple of three other people who got awards, and I'd like to shout them out for the same sort of thing. But Elaine Allen, who is a head teacher, exec head teacher in Blackpool, who's really big on the literacy front. She's a national leader for literacy, and she, very humble sort of person, but actually, real driver. When you speak to her, she's driving hard for those kids, and some of those kids haven't got a great deal. Also, Graham Cowley, he got an OBE as well. He's the chair of the Blackpool Opportunity Area, and Graham, he was brought up in Versackley, and when I sent him an email, and he said, "Who would have thought a kid from our estate could get an OBE?" But again, the sort of leadership that Graham brings, because not from education, but he's, he sort of puts, let's put all that to one side. What's the solution? How are we going to improve it? And I think that sort of leadership, where you're bringing people from different sort of disciplines together, has proved really successful, together with that sort of gentle approach that he's got, and the sort of dogged determination. And then there's Christine Gilbert, the former chief inspector, who got a CBE. And I had to say, I did have run-ins with Christine, but there were times when she was the most loyal, most supportive individual I've worked with. And we all have weaknesses, don't we? And we have our strengths. But actually, one of Christine's strengths was the way that she made sure that people that were working close to her felt as though they had her backing. So well done to those three colleagues. my one is there is something called the National Institute of Teaching, and this is a group of MAT leaders. You could probably guess which ones, who have created a National Institute of Teaching, and they are currently there's a review of all teacher providers, teacher training providers going on. Some of some providers like the University of Birmingham, the University of Newcastle, I think it is, who were graded as outstanding by Ofsted, have failed to meet the mark in the first round. But they're also senior partners to the National Institute of Teaching. So it all looks a little bit embarrassing, but I'm sure they'll get over the line. It'll be diplomatic to make them get over the line. But the new CEO of that institute said that the purpose of the institute was to raise the tide so that it lifts all the boats. And I really wasn't really that engaged with all of this, to be honest, recently, until I heard that statement, because it sort of like undermines, it feels to me as if it's undermining all the current providers. And it actually sort of says that, you know, something that's completely untested is new to a market and is saying that we're much better than the others, even though not one single teacher has been trained through that institute yet. Yeah, and it's just that sort of feeling of, hang on, these words do count and these words do matter. And actually, if that is the approach that's going to be established by a new provider in what is meant to be a collaborative get together in terms of delivering sufficient teachers for the nation, you know, that is not a good way to start. So loose words, all that sort of stuff.
That analogy though is about equality, isn't it, rather than equity, because it lifts all the boats, not the ones that need lifting.
It's the cooperative experience is oozing out of you now.
No, I think of another quote that somebody said recently, when I think it would have been a government announcement or a minister that said, we're all in the same boat. And they replied saying, no, we're all in the same storm. Some are in luxury liners and some are in leaky rowing boats. Now, we're all in the same storm together, but it's very different experience depending on which boat you're in.
Yeah. It's funny. Go on, Neil.
Well, there's often a lack of leadership from that strategic level. I noticed that there's a difference between leadership in education and leadership of education. And, you know, we talk about head teachers and deputy heads and assistant heads and you know, leaders at every level in school, this sort of stuff that that we're discussing today. And then you sometimes, and I think the same's probably true across everything where government or things the government have appointed or involved, the leadership which comes down from the highest level often, well, actually it isn't leadership at all. It's kind of direction, domination and manipulation, and it's really different. So what it is that we need to see in schools to make them thrive is often not being role modeled by the organizations that are responsible, whether it's the National Institute for Teaching or whatever.
Yeah,
Absolutely right.
Yeah,
and in a way, that's how academisation was sold to the first schools that jumped into it, because the idea was they would have complete autonomy. That it would be for them to decide the curriculum, the time, how you worked, who you work with, and that's slowly dissolved.
It's really interesting because for those people who perhaps aren't aware of the creation of academies, but they were meant to be, under the Blair government, they were meant to be addressing schools where local authorities and other initiatives had failed to provide, you know, address some of the concerns that there were about quality of education in those institutions. And that number was quite small. It was never meant to be a sort of, you know, countrywide project, shall we say. You know, so these were known as sponsored academies. They were meant to be drawing in businesses, you know, philanthropy, people who wanted to perhaps do things slightly differently because it needed that sort of approach, or it was felt as though it was needed that sort of approach. But we've now moved from that. into a government that wants every school to be an academy. So I think it's important to understand the origins of this and how it's sort of like, because the point Stan makes is really relevant, I think, because that was part of a strong part, not of the selling point, but it was one of the factors that meant that they had greater freedom to actually sort of try and do things slightly differently to others.
Yeah, and I think we always should say at this point, there are some really good academy trusts, and there are some really poor local, or there were some really poor local authorities. So it's not, it's never one is better than the other. It's just, you know, in going on this journey, what do we lose that we could have gained, and what could we have won in doing something like this that we failed to see? And I do think the centralisation now that the white paper is suggesting is a real step backwards from the idea of innovation coming from schools themselves.
Well, one of the reasons we wanted Neil on, because he's got this new book called The Leadership Book. I wondered, Neil,
You got a copy of it, Neil, to hold up? Sorry, I should have asked you that before.
Yeah, they're in a box. Hold on, it depends how long I can go off screen.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
But what brought you, you know, what made you feel as though, I mean, because one of the things we were talking about before, it's not one of these books. So anybody thinking of purchasing it, don't worry, it's not this thick, you know. So the thing is that what made you write it, you know, in the first place?
I've always enjoyed writing, and particularly about culture and leadership. When I was a soldier, I led a Gurkha squadron in Iraq, and before we went out to Iraq, we took on another 30 or 40 soldiers from other units who joined us. And I think that was when I first set out my thoughts on culture and leadership. Just one pages. You'll see from the book. I write sparsely, and I wrote one pages on what leadership could look like, and what the culture that I wanted us to have would look like. And I still refer back to those from time to time. Then I spent many years working in leadership development, initially coaching, and then it's come much more into leading courses and running an organization which develops leadership. But COVID hit, and it hit me quite hard, and it hit me in the opposite way to the way it hit teachers. I had nothing to do. Like everything stopped. Nobody wanted to see me. And I used that time to write actually a series of videos. I wrote 30 videos about leadership. They're kind of 8 to 10 minutes long.
Are they on your website?
Yeah, they're on Leader Connect. Yeah. And there's also some stuff on our YouTube. I think there's quite a lot on our YouTube, which is Neil Jurd or Leader Connect. I think either finds it. But I wrote them as videos. And the thing with writing something which you have to say to a camera is it forces you to cut out the waffle. It's a really good exercise. People, when they write a book, there is this tendency to use flowery language, to make a sentence twice as long as it needs to be. And that doesn't work if you're recording a video, because you feel silly using excess words. So I wrote the videos, recorded the videos, and at the same time, I thought, well, I'm never going to write this much again. I never want to write this much again. So I repurposed probably 80% of it into what has become the book.
So, and the reaction to it?
Very, very good. I mean, if you looked it up on, Amazon is probably the place there's the most reviews, but it's got a couple of hundred reviews or more, and solid 5 stars. I've got all sorts of stuff. Can't find it, but what was it in recently? Is this it? It was in. So this is the Institute of Leadership and Management's. I'm just going to flick through here, just because if I can find it, there's actually a copy of what the book cover looks like as well, but it won't be there. Oh, here we are. Right, this isn't going to work very well, but that's what the book cover looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
that review there says insightful guidance.
Yes. Yes.
So is that the start? Is that what you were trying to achieve? Not to just, is it, because some books about leadership are around, they make you think rather than offering guidance. You know what I mean? They feel slightly different. One's slightly more direct than the other, I think.
I think now you've said that, the first thing was to write videos. That to me now makes far more sense of the book. Because I can feel in the, having read it, I can feel in the book now that where there's a natural break to say, and I know you do put a little bit in to say, now you might want to just reflect about that before you go on to the next bit. So that now for me makes a lot of sense of the structure of the book.
Yeah, it's simple. The structure's simple, but my whole take on leadership, and really the more I've read and the more I've talked about leadership, the more convinced I am that it isn't hard. It comes down to a few really basic things which anybody can do. And I mean, there are a lot of books that touch on leadership out there, but a lot of them can leave you confused or leave you with a lot of thinking to do, but actually not stuff you can just go and apply straight away. And my take on it is that being yourself is the absolute core of good leadership. And when people get that, it's a real relief, because they have this idea that you have to be something else. To be a leader, you have to sound a bit posh. And it's this stereotype that they're not going to be, or trying to contort themselves to be that will make them less authentic. So be yourself, know where you're going, connect with people, really connect with people. That's probably enough.
I mean, the thing for me is I can see, I mean, we've got 4 grandchildren. I can see our eldest grandchild is a born leader, but not in the leader. She wants to bring her friends on, so they're doing I've been so impressed with it. She, about 18 months ago, she set up a reading book sharing thing at school. So basically she asked her friends to bring books that they're not reading at home, and she put them on a trolley, took them out to the playground, and children could just take a book. And so in a way, so I thought this was going to be one of those, it's going to die a death sort of thing, but it really hasn't. And there are now sort of like book leaders, and the thing goes out twice a week now.
Wow.
But for me, there is this thing about, how did she get that? How did she feel as though she could take that role? Why was it, or why is it that others don't feel as if they want to take that leadership? And it made me think whether or not this is sort of obviously something in the way that she's been brought up, but also, is it something inherently, is there a little bit of genetics in this? Is it that some leaders appear to just can do it? They have some of the DNA that makes it work. Or is it actually they've just seen people do it and they've learned it by osmosis, this sort of stuff?
I do think there's an element of opportunity that so if you've never had the chance to lead, because that opportunity, and I know somebody would say, well, you take the opportunity. Well, that's not always the case, especially when you're young. And I think when I've looked back on what did lead, when did I start to be a leader? And it's things like at age 8 and 9 in clubs and scouts and things like that, where you are suddenly in charge of 6 of your friends, but you're in charge, and somebody's asking you what your 6 friends and you are going to do. And I think maybe we need to look at the positives of leadership in organizations like that. And again, I would probably agree with you, Neil, that I doubt very many of the people who are leading clubs and scouts and things have had leadership training to train leaders.
No. And there'd be something cultural there as well, in terms of what the school's like, and the fact that she feels safe to do that. That she knows that there's probably a supportive group of friends around her. There's probably some encouragement from others, and all these things help a leader. We talked about the lonely head earlier, and I think sometimes heads make themselves a little lonelier than they need to be. They discount the support and friendship and kindness of deputies and, well, anyone, governors, staff, anyone in the school can support them. And I bet your granddaughter feels she has that kind of safety to make something happen.
Yeah. I think also I think she's not scared of failing, which I think sometimes happens as you get older, and then we've spoken before about on here about how exams and assessment make children feel as though they can be failures when in fact they've actually achieved well, but perhaps not to the level everybody wants them to achieve. But I think she's not, if this fell over after a week, it would fall over after a week. It wasn't as if it was so critical. I think that's part of it, that everything is built up to be, it's sort of like do or die sort of stuff. You've got to get to it, and actually I think this sort of like feeling of, well, I'm going to give it a go, and if it works, it works, and if not, we'll move on, sort of thing.
Yeah.
We've lost a little bit of that, I think, in education. As if everything's got to be polished, it's got to work first time, if it's not, everything's got to be successful. It's because it's got to be effective.
There's something there where I think overly tight control or management will prevent performance below a certain level, but it will also almost certainly prevent performance above a certain level. It tightly bands people in this middle zone where individual brilliance, creativity, and energy is very, very muted. But with the same effect, it means that individual failings and idleness and underperformance are also controlled. So I can see why it's there to prevent the lower performance, but actually I'm much more in favor of trusting people, developing people, inspiring people.
Really interesting. Really interesting.
One of the most embarrassing points to me working with us, mentioned before, Mark Borden and Mindflick, was he was telling me, working with elite sports, how they'd found that working on people's strengths and developing the strengths was a far more effective way of improving performance than looking at individuals' weaknesses. And he said, because he'd never worked with education at that time, and he said, so what do you do in schools? What does appraisal do? And it was like, wow, how embarrassing. Our appraisal system at the time picked out 3 areas for development that were all areas of weakness.
I know.
So that actually changed my, just that very conversation changed the way I looked at things. When I was a manager in the local authority, I changed our own team's appraisal. So it was 2 things you think you could do better and something that you think you're really good at. We could even push that even further, and we call that the dream. What would you have as a dream? And I mean, I would say as a result of that conversation, there is now an outdoor ed centre on Lake Windermere with the best accommodation, because that's what came out of an appraisal.
Well, actually, let me just stop you there, because believe it or not, we have 40 minutes, and we normally sort of draw the line. It goes so quickly, Neil. But before we finish, we give our guest the Room 101 options. So, have you got something you'd like to put in Room 101?
Manchester Airport.
Like, have you experienced that recently?
No, but I'm going. Yes, I have actually. Sorry, I have. About a month ago, we went, and the queues they weren't epic, but they were ridiculous for a developed nation's 3rd or 4th largest airport. The queue was probably something like an hour long, but very, very luckily, when I booked these tickets 4 months before, I had the speedy.
The speedy boarding.
But how awful that our system is so bad that to get an acceptable level of service, you have to pay extra. So
they've cancelled that now. They have cancelled that now. You can't get that now because everybody was doing it. So you defeated the object.
It just seems obscene, though, that something really important like one of our major airports, and it's not just Manchester, is it? It's Leeds, Bradford, Birmingham. There are some of them, and it's all saving money. It was all the efforts to save money in COVID, and it's poor leadership, poor planning, and the effect is just causing chaos and misery. And while I'm on airports, just Ryanair, because their culture sucks. The idea that you can discount service in order to keep costs down, I just think it's horrific. I think travel should be a pleasure, and we've somehow turned it into a really unpleasant experience. Or I find it a really unpleasant experience going through British airports, and Ryanair, which I actually don't use anymore, but I just find it awful.
Well, I'm if I can just finish with this. I mean, the first time I flew was when I was 25, and we took our youngest child and to Ibiza, and on the way back we had virtually a plane to ourselves. You know, and we have a photograph of us with about sort of 200 seats, and there's about 4 people on the plane, and but at the time I was so excited about going on a plane, and I was not disappointed. You know, I was not disappointed. It was just an amazing experience. You know, I don't remember queuing anywhere. I don't remember baggage being a problem, you know, and where we've got to now, you know, where prices are probably lower, but the quality of the service is now, for me, thinking of going on holiday, it's a prohibitor. It should be opening up the world, but it's actually making me feel as though I don't really want to do it. You know, I don't want to book that holiday. We're thinking of going to Malaga in October. I'm waiting now. I'm holding off just to see what it's like, because this will stop us going if it doesn't improve.
Yeah, and I mean, we used to do, before COVID, quite a few city breaks with friends, and it's just interesting what Neil said then about enjoying. We've reduced the flight thing to a necessary evil, I think.
Yeah.
So we have used Ryanair quite often, never really had a problem, but used it as a, you know, it's a utilitarian. You know, we know it's going to be no frills. So if we accept that, we follow the rules, you can survive it, but there's no pleasure in those flights.
No.
It's got white clean seats. It's like a mobile A&E.
Yeah. But I can imagine a time when the seats are taken out and they put stanchions in, like at football grounds. You just stand for the whole of the journey.
Stay standing.
Anyway, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Neil. It's an absolute pleasure. I found some of your insights, you know, and we don't say this to every guest, but I found some of your insights really, you know, very, very helpful, and certainly have a place in leadership at school level. And Stan, I hope everything works out well this week, and some good news, and we're hopefully, everybody being well, we'll see everybody next week when we've got Sam Strickland, somebody who's a schoolie but also an author as well. So we've got Sam on next week. So all being well, we'll see everybody next week, and thank you, Neil, again.
Thank you, Ben.